facing the world.
This is the English service of Radio Algeria International. It's time for the news.
The Minister of State, Minister of Foreign Affairs, National Community Abroad and African Affairs, Mr. Ahmed Attaf, has called for reviving joint efforts to prevent and settle conflicts in Africa and ensure peace and security in the continent. Algerian Foreign Minister Ahmed Attaf also participated in the high-level debate on the UN Security Council on the link between artificial intelligence and peace and security in the world. And while the Zionist war machine continues to kill innocent lives in the occupied Palestinian territory, Spain and Italy have sent naval ships into the Mediterranean Sea charged with protecting the global Sumud flotilla, which is carrying aid towards Gaza. Those were the headlines, and now the news in detail from Radio Algeria International. First in our news, the Minister of State in charge of Foreign Affairs of the National Community Abroad and the African Affairs, Mr. Ahmed Attaf, has emphasized in New York the necessity of an effective African diplomatic vision, expressing Algeria's full support for the chairperson of the African Union Commission, Mr. Mahmoud Ali Youssef, in his efforts to reposition the AU and to revive its central and essential role. In his speech at the AU Peace and Security Council Summit on reviving efforts for conflict prevention and resolution in Africa, held on the sidelines of the United Nations General Assembly, Mr. Attaf stated that in light of the latest developments, emphasis should be laid on three serious factors which cumulatively affect the peace and security landscape on the African continent. Mr. Attaf stated that Africa faces unprecedented simultaneous conflicts and rising instability, with terrorism surging in attacks and deaths.
At a time when these challenges are growing bigger, our continental diplomatic response has grown weaker. Mediation efforts and peace processes have not kept pace with the worsening situation, thus leaving a huge vacuum for forces of instability to spread and to expand even more. Having said that, we also need to be mindful of the responsibility that lies upon us, the member states. Our responsibility is to work together to put in place the appropriate mechanisms to provide the needed resources and to ensure the implementation of what has been agreed. In this regard, I would like to share a few reflections with this esteemed gathering.
That was the Minister of State in charge of Foreign Affairs of the National Community Abroad and African Affairs, Mr. Ahmed Attaf. And in the face of the growing threat, Mr. Attaf stated that the key components of Africa's peace and security architecture, namely the early warning system and African standby force, remain underdeveloped despite their crucial role in preventing and resolving conflicts. Let's listen to Mr. Attaf again.
As we contemplate to embark on a new reform process that will target the African peace and security architecture, we should not forget that this architecture is yet to be fully operationalized. When the Peace and Security Council is working hard to achieve its utmost potential, two other major components of APSA are yet to be fully implemented. These two components, which are the early warning system and the African standby force, are of critical importance for both conflict prevention and conflict resolution.
And the Minister of State highlighted that the African Union's strength lies in diplomacy and mediation rather than military action, and stressed the need to reactivate these practices in conflict zones supported by the AU Peace Fund. The Minister of State, Minister of Foreign Affairs, National Community Abroad and African Affairs, Mr. Ahmed Attaf, has taken part in the high-level debate of the UN Security Council on the link between artificial intelligence and peace and security in the world. This debate was scheduled at the initiative of the Republic of Korea, which holds the presidency of the Security Council for the month of September. Mr. Attaf emphasized that AI is a key geostrategic factor with legal, ethical, and security challenges, and Algeria is committed to supporting Africa in addressing them. Let's listen to him.
Artificial intelligence is no longer merely a technical tool, but has become a decisive geostrategic factor in the process of reshaping the balance of power on the international stage. Artificial intelligence is no longer just a promising project for humanity, but has come to pose many legal, ethical, and even security challenges that affect the sovereignty of states. While my country continues to work on implementing its national strategy in the field of digital transformation, it is fully committed to contributing even to a small extent to addressing the challenges facing our African continent in this field.
Meanwhile, Mr. Attaf's participation in this debate allowed presenting Algeria's vision regarding the future of global governance and artificial intelligence and defending the right of African countries to keep pace with the ongoing technological revolution. The Minister of State, Minister of Foreign Affairs of the National Community Abroad, Mr. Ahmed Attaf, has held in New York bilateral meetings with his counterparts from several brotherly and friendly countries as part of his participation in the high-level segment of the United Nations General Assembly. Masoud Sharfi has more details.
The Minister of State met with the foreign ministers of Mauritania, Bahrain, Libya, South Sudan, and Cyprus. Minister of State Ahmed Attaf met with Mauritanian Minister Mohammed Salem Ould Merzoug to review the Algerian-Mauritanian partnership under directives from the President Abdelmajid Tebboune and Mohammed Ould Sheikh Al Ghazawani. He also met with Bahraini Foreign Minister Abdel Latif bin Rashid Al Zayani on Middle East developments and Algeria's UN Security Council experience ahead of Bahrain's January 2026 membership. Meetings with Libyan Minister Tahir al-Baour focused on fraternal relations and Libya's situation, with South Sudan's Minister Monday Semaya Kumba on development and stability, and with Cypriot Minister Konstantinos Kambos on bilateral ties, upcoming elections, and Euro-Mediterranean partnership prospects. Earlier, Mr. Attaf has also held bilateral meetings with the foreign ministers of several friendly European countries. He met with Slovenian Vice Prime Minister and Foreign Mrs. Tanja Foujan, Spanish Foreign Mr. Jose Manuel Albares, and Dutch Foreign Mr. David Van Wiel. With Ms. Fajan, he discussed implementing outcomes of President Abdelmajid Tebboune's May state visit to Slovenia and ongoing preparations of the first Intergovernmental Commission, emphasizing continued bilateral coordination on the UN Security Council within the E10 framework. Talks with Ms. Albares reviewed progress in strengthening the Algeria-Spain partnership in economic and other priority areas, while discussions with Mr. Van Wiel focused on bilateral relations, their promotion, and regional issues of common interest.
And Algeria has reaffirmed, through the voice of Foreign Minister Ahmed Attaf, that dialogue and negotiation are the only path to resolving the Russian-Ukrainian crisis, expressing his conviction that the momentum of good office and diplomatic initiatives must prevail over that of conflict and military confrontation. Mr. Ashrafi again.
In his address during a Security Council session devoted to Ukraine, Mr. Attaf affirmed Algeria's support for all diplomatic and mediation efforts, stressing that dialogue and negotiations are the only path to peace. He warned against escalations, urged bridging divisions despite differences, and noted with regret that the war, now in its fourth year, brings only losses, with Russia and Ukraine suffering immense human, infrastructural, and economic damage, and the world at large bearing its consequences. At the regional level, Mr. Attaf warned that the war in Ukraine has plunged Europe into its gravest crisis since World War II, with global repercussions on food, energy, and international security. He stressed that ending the war is now an international interest, recalling President Abdelmajid Tebboune's mediation initiative between Russia and Ukraine, and reaffirming Algeria's conviction that diplomacy, not confrontation, must lead to a just and lasting political solution based on the UN Charter and international law.
Mandated or entrusted by the President of the Republic, Mr. Abdelmajid Tebboune, the Minister of Labour, Employment and Social Security, Abdelhak Saihi, is participating in the proceedings of the 80th session of the United Nations General Assembly held in New York from September 22nd to 29. In a speech delivered at the first summit on sustainable global economy, organized under the presidency of the UN Secretary General, Mr. Antonio Guterres, Mr. Saihi presented Algeria's approach aimed at contributing to the reform of the global financial system and strengthening the pillars of sustainable development, the statement specifies. Let's listen to Mr. Saihi.
إن هذه الفجوات إن تركت من دون
If these gaps are left without serious treatment, their repercussions will not be limited to the countries of the South, but will extend to threaten the stability of the entire world. Hence, the urgent need to adopt a new approach to addressing the issue that hinders the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals, an approach that first relies on rebuilding bridges of trust between the North and the South, secondly on reforming the structural imbalances of the global economy, and thirdly and finally on fulfilling all international commitments to supporting sustainable development, commitments to financing development, commitments to addressing the debt crisis, commitments to ensuring climate justice, and commitments to strengthening good governance. This is the approach in which Algeria, along with all developing countries, believes to achieve a major, just, fair and sustainable world.
وأكثر استدامة.
That was the Minister of Labour, Employment and Social Security, Abdelhak Sayhi, and the Secretary of State to the Minister of Foreign Affairs in charge of African Affairs, Ms. Zalma Bakhta-Mansouri, has received at the Ministry headquarters the advisor to the Prime Minister of Slovenia in charge of development cooperation and humanitarian aid, Mrs. Morja Skolchar-Tok, as part of her working visit to Algeria. Ms. Oud Sharfi tells us more.
According to a statement from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the National Community Abroad and African Affairs, the meeting was an opportunity to review the current state of cooperation between Algeria and Slovenia and prospects for its development, particularly in the areas of economy, trade and investment, in addition to exchanging views on issues of humanitarian and development cooperation. The two sides also praised the outcomes of the state visit made by the President of the Republic, Mr. Abdelmajid Tebboune, to Slovenia last May, which gave a qualitative boost to bilateral relations and contributed to deepening political consultation and coordination between the two countries on regional and international issues of common interest. Algeria's pride in Slovenia's principled positions, particularly its unwavering support for the rights of the Palestinian people and its efforts to promote the values of peace, security and solidarity at the regional and international levels, was also emphasized during the meeting.
And now the President of the International Union of Judicial Officers, Mark Schmitz, has praised Algeria's position based on the values of openness and dialogue, as well as efforts to promote the development of the profession and support its members. Speaking at the 7th Africa-Europe meeting of judicial officers held here in Algeria, Mr. Smich emphasized that Algeria's choice to host a major event was not fortuitous, but rather reflected its deep conviction in the values of openness and dialogue. Let's listen to him.
Algiers was not chosen by chance. It stands out for the dignity it inspires and for the values of openness and dialogue it carries. By hosting our Africa-Europe meetings, Algeria strongly reminds us that justice is not limited to an institution. It is above all a universal value, deeply rooted in history, in the culture and soul of peoples.
For his part, the Minister of Justice and Keeper of the Seals, Mr. Lutfi Boujem'a, stated that the organization by Algeria of the 7th Africa-Europe meetings of judicial officers fully illustrates its place and role on the international scene at all levels.
Advancing the profession towards the best in its finest details and activating a joint effort towards the best approaches that can be adopted in light of the exchange of experiences in Africa and the world as a whole. And I am convinced that organizing this dialogue between the elite of legal, judicial and human rights actors will expand and strengthen visions in the field of clarifying the role of the judicial officer in light of the rapid developments taking place in today's world, especially since our African continent occupies a strategic position that has an impact and is subject to impact by what is happening.
And finally, Spain and Italy have sent naval ships into the Mediterranean Sea charged with protecting the global Sumud flotilla, which is carrying aid towards Gaza. Italy said on Thursday that it is sending a second ship, while Spain said its navy will also act. Rome dispatched a frigate the previous day following a drone attack on the flotilla in international waters after it came under drone attack en route to Gaza to deliver aid. With this last piece of news, we come to the end of this news bulletin. We'll leave you now with our weekly programs. Until then, stay tuned to Radio Algeria International. Bye-bye.
Shakespeare was the third child of John Shakespeare, a glove maker and leather merchant, and Mary Arden, a local heiress to land. John held official positions as alderman and bailiff, an office resembling a mayor. However, records indicate John's fortunes declined sometime in the late 1570s. Eventually, he recovered somewhat and was granted a coat of arms in 1596, which made him and his son official gentlemen. Scant records exist of Shakespeare's childhood and virtually none regarding his education. Scholars have surmised that he most likely attended the King's New School in Stratford, which taught reading, writing and the classics including Latin. He attended until he was 14 or 15 and did not continue to university. The uncertainty regarding his education has led some people question the authorship of his work. There are 7 years of Shakespeare's life with no records exist after the birth of his twins in 1585 until 1592. Scholars call this period Shakespeare's lost years, and there is wide speculation about what he was doing during this period. One theory is that he might have gone into hiding for poaching game from local landlord Sir Thomas Lucy. Another possibility is that he might have been working as an assistant schoolmaster in Lancashire. Some scholars believe that he was in London, working as a horse attendant at some of London's finer theatres before breaking on the scene. By 1592, there is evidence Shakespeare earned a living as an actor and a playwright in London and possibly had several plays produced. Early in his career, Shakespeare was able to attract the attention and patronage of Henry Wriothesley, the Earl of Southampton, to whom he dedicated his first and second published poems, Venus and Adonis, in 1593, and The Rape of Lucrece in 1594. In fact, these long narrative poems, 1,194 and 1,855 lines, respectively, were Shakespeare's first published works. In 1594, Shakespeare joined Lord Chamberlain's Men, the London acting company that he worked with for the duration of his career. Later called the King's Men, it was considered the most important troupe of its time and was very popular by all accounts. Some sources describe Shakespeare as a founding member of the company, but whatever the case, he became central to its success. Initially, he was an actor and eventually devoted more and more time to writing. Record shows that Shakespeare, who was also a company shareholder, had works published as soon as popular literature. Today we are talking about a poet and playwright who is considered the greatest dramatist of all time. His works are loved throughout the world, but his personal life is shrouded in mystery. Today we shed light on the legendary William Shakespeare. Shakespeare was an English poet, playwright and actor of the Renaissance era. He was an important member of the King's Men theatrical company from roughly 1594 onward. Known throughout the world, Shakespeare's works, including at least 37 plays, 154 sonnets and 2 narrative poems, capture the range of human emotion and conflict and have been celebrated for more than 400 years. Details about his personal life are limited, though some believe he was born and died on the same day, April 23rd, 52 years apart. The personal life of William Shakespeare is somewhat of a mystery. There are 2 primary sources that provide historians with an outline of his life. One is his work, and the other is official documentation such as churches and court records. However, these provide only brief sketches of specific events in his life and yield little insight into the man himself. No birth records exist, but an old church record indicates that William Shakespeare was baptized at Holy Trinity Church in Stratford-upon-Avon on April 26, 1564. From this, it is believed he was born on or near April 23, 1564, and this is the date scholars acknowledge as Shakespeare's birthday. Located about 100 miles northwest of London, Stratford-upon-Avon was a bustling market town along the River Avon. In 1594, Shakespeare joined Lord Chamberlain's Men, the London acting company that he worked with for the duration of his career. Later called the King's Men, it was considered the most important troupe of its time and was very popular by all accounts. Some sources describe Shakespeare as a founding member of the company, but whatever the case, he became central to its success. Initially, he was an actor and eventually devoted more and more time to writing. By the end of 1597, Shakespeare had likely written 16 of his 37 plays and amassed some wealth. At this time, civil records show Shakespeare purchased one of the largest houses in Stratford, called New Place, for his family. It was a 4-day ride by horse from Stratford to London, so it's believed that Shakespeare spent most of his time in the city writing and acting, and came once a year during the 40-day Lenten period when the theatres were closed. Although the theatre culture in the 16th century England was not greatly admired by people of high rank, some of them notably were good patrons of the performing arts and friends of the actors. Two notable exceptions were Queen Elizabeth I, who was a fan of Lord Chamberlain's Men by the late 1590s, after first watching a performance in 1594, and her successor King James I. Following his crowning in 1603, the company changed its name to the King's Men. By 1599, Shakespeare and several fellow actors built their own theatre on the south bank of the Thames River, which they called the Globe Theatre. Julius Caesar's is thought to be the first production. At the new open-air theatre, owning the playhouse proved to be a financial boon for Shakespeare and the other investors. It's difficult to determine the exact chronology of Shakespeare's play, but over the course of 2 decades, from about 1590 to 1613, he wrote 37 plays revolving around 3 main themes: history, tragedy, and comedy. Some plays blur these lines, and over time our interpretation of them has changed too. Shakespeare's early plays were written in the conventional style of the day, with elaborate metaphors and rhetorical phrases that didn't always align naturally with the story's plot or characters. However, Shakespeare was very innovative, adapting the traditional style to his own purposes and creating a freer flow of words. With only small degrees of variation, Shakespeare primarily used a metrical pattern consisting of lines and unrhymed iambic pentameter or blank verse to compose his plays. At the same time, there are passages in all the plays that deviate from these and use forms of poetry or simple prose. Around the turn of 17th century, Shakespeare became a more extensive property owner in Stratford. When his father John died in 1601, he inherited the family home. In 1605, Shakespeare purchased leases of real estate near Stratford for £440, which doubled in value and earned him £60 a year. This made him an entrepreneur as well as an artist, and scholars believe these investments gave him uninterrupted time to write his plays. Tradition holds that Shakespeare died on his 52nd birthday, April 23rd, 1616, but some scholars believe this is a myth. Church records show he was interred at Holy Trinity Church on April 25, 1616. The exact cause of Shakespeare's death is unknown, though many people believe he died following a brief illness. The Bard of Avon has gone down in history as the greatest dramatist of all time and is sometimes called England's national poet. He is credited with inventing or introducing more than 1,700 words to the English language, often as a result of combining words, changing usage, or blending in foreign root words. If you've used the words downstairs, egregious, kissing, zany, or skim milk, you can thank Shakespeare. He is also responsible for many common phrases, such as love is blind or will good chase.
تشاهدون برامج إذاعة الجزائر الدولية للصوت والصورة.